Do you even know how to mop, old woman? Or are you just here to waste company time? Marcus Reed's voice cracked through the empty corridor like a whip. The stainless steel coffee mug in his hand tilted, slow, deliberate, and the steaming liquid splashed across the floor Eleanor Carter had just polished until it gleamed like glass. He smirked, stepped right into the puddle with his Italian leather shoes, and ground his heel against the tile as if to erase her work and her dignity in one motion. In that instant, Eleanor felt the sting, not of the insult, but of the truth that her life's creation, BrightWave Technologies, had fallen into the hands of people who treated others like this. Before I take you deeper into this story, where are you watching from? Comment below. If stories like this move you, like and subscribe so we can share more moments that matter. Now, let me tell you exactly how a retired black CEO found herself standing in a janitor's uniform, watching her company's soul rot from the inside out. Eleanor Carter had built BrightWave from nothing, literally nothing. She still remembered the cold nights in her cramped Tacoma apartment, tapping out lines of code at a folding table, her mother's old Bible propped open beside her as a reminder that faith and hard work had to walk hand in hand. She had fought through racism in boardrooms, sexism in venture capital meetings, and the gnawing doubt that whispered maybe she wasn't meant to lead in an industry that didn't look like her. And yet, she had risen, turning a seed of an idea into a $5 billion fintech empire headquartered in the glass and steel heart of Seattle. 2 years ago, she had retired, handing the reins to her daughter, Dr. Sophia Carter, brilliant, Harvard-educated, and passionate about innovation. But lately, troubling whispers had reached her ears. Whispers of a toxic workplace culture, of employees leaving in tears, of discrimination creeping into the halls she had once filled with hope. At first, Eleanor didn't want to believe it. She had trusted her leadership team. Marcus Reed, the operations director, had been with BrightWave for 7 years. Nathan Brooks, the marketing VP, was smooth-talking but talented. Claire Donovan, the HR director, had once been an advocate for fairness. If the stories were true, something had gone very wrong. Eleanor knew one thing: confronting them directly would get her polite denials and rehearsed answers. No, if she wanted the truth, she had to see it for herself. That's when the idea came to her. As bold as it was risky, she would go undercover. She would become invisible, and in corporate America, few people were treated as invisible as the janitorial staff. She spent a week preparing: a cheap wig of wiry gray hair, thick glasses that slightly magnified her eyes, a plain navy polo shirt, black slacks, and worn sneakers. She even practiced stooping her shoulders and slowing her walk, adopting the posture of someone carrying decades of physical labor in her bones. And just like that, Eleanor Carter, founder of BrightWave Technologies, ceased to exist. In her place stood Lila Jones, a 60-year-old contract cleaner hired through an outside agency. Her first night on the job began in the quiet after the last employees had left. The Seattle skyline glowed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city's lights reflected on spotless glass. Eleanor pushed a gray mop bucket down the hallway toward the executive wing. She had barely finished her first pass when Marcus appeared, his phone in one hand, his mug in the other. The way his eyes swept over her made her skin prickle, not with fear, but with the sharp awareness of being dismissed, judged, and categorized in an instant. He didn't see a founder. He didn't see a woman who had built the very floor he stood on. He saw a cleaner, an obstacle in his path, and therefore someone beneath basic respect. "Careful," he said with mock cheer, sidestepping the mop. "Wouldn't want you to slip and break a hip. The paperwork would be a nightmare." And then, he spilled the coffee. Not an accident. Not even subtle. Just a message. One Eleanor understood perfectly. In his eyes, she was nothing. She bit back her first instinct to speak. This was why she was here. Not to lash out, but to observe, to gather. She murmured a quiet, "Yes, sir," and bent to work, the sting of hot liquid already cooling under her hands. It was Tina Morales who found her a few minutes later. Tina was in her late 20s, with a determined light in her eyes that no amount of scrubbing floors could dim. "Hey, don't let him get to you," Tina whispered, passing her a fresh mop head. "He does that to all of us. I've seen 2 people quit this month because of him. The guy's poison." Eleanor tucked that away. Over the next hour, as they worked side by side, Tina shared pieces of the bigger picture, how Marcus nitpicked their work, how Nathan Brooks once knocked over a trash bin just to see a janitor pick it up, how Claire in HR brushed off every complaint as overreaction. Eleanor listened, nodding, asking just enough questions to keep Tina talking without raising suspicion. The more she heard, the heavier the weight in her chest grew. This wasn't just rudeness. It was a culture of contempt. And if this was how they treated janitors, what did that say about how they treated junior developers, interns, or anyone without power? By the end of the shift, Eleanor had seen enough to know the rumors weren't exaggerated. She had also decided something important. This wouldn't be a one-night experiment. She would stay in the role of Lila Jones for as long as it took to understand exactly how deep the rot went. That night, in the small apartment she had rented under her alias, Eleanor opened her notebook. She wrote down everything: Marcus's words, his tone, Tina's testimony, even the way the break room fridge was locked to prevent cleaning staff from storing their lunches. Every detail mattered, because one day soon, she would bring all of this into the light, and when she did, no one at BrightWave would ever look at a janitor, or their CEO, the same way again. By her second week as Lila Jones, Eleanor Carter had learned that the most brutal wounds in a toxic workplace didn't come from screaming matches or public humiliation. They came quietly, like a slow leak in the ceiling, dripping day after day until the foundation rotted. She felt it in the way the security guard barely looked at her badge before waving her through. Because in his mind, a janitor wasn't worth checking. She heard it in the half-hearted hey from employees who kept walking without waiting for a reply. And she saw it most clearly in Tina Morales' eyes the night Tina leaned against her mop handle and sighed. Sometimes, I wonder if they even know we're people. The 2 of them were cleaning the executive lounge, a space lined with leather chairs and glass walls overlooking Puget Sound. Eleanor had always loved that view. It reminded her of why she'd built BrightWave in Seattle, to create jobs in her hometown, to give people from backgrounds like hers a shot at the tech world. But now, standing in Lila's sneakers instead of Eleanor's heels, she noticed the space differently. The cushions had crumbs ground into them, as though no one expected the staff to mind. An empty wine glass sat on the window ledge, ringed with fingerprints, and the smell, faint but sour, told her someone had spilled something days ago and left it for the cleaners to handle. Tina's voice was low, almost resigned. Last month, after Maria quit. Claire didn't even ask why. Just told the rest of us we'd have to pick up the slack. She shook her head. Maria had been here for 8 years. She worked harder than anyone. But Marcus, he'd stand over her shoulder and point out missed spots just to watch her squirm. She left in tears one night, and I haven't seen her since. Eleanor kept her own face neutral, but inside, the anger burned hotter. She remembered being a young coder, staying late to debug software, only to have a project manager check in by questioning her every keystroke. It wasn't about quality. It was about control. Later that night, Eleanor saw Marcus in action again. She was mopping an already spotless conference room when his shadow fell across the doorway. "Missed a corner," he said flatly. She glanced down. The floor was flawless, but he stood there, arms folded, waiting, slowly. She dragged the mop back over the same spot. Again. He ordered, and again she complied, knowing full well this was a test, not of cleanliness, but of submission. After he left, Tina slipped in, eyes wide. He did that to me yesterday. Said my table polish was streaky, even though it was perfect. I think he gets a kick out of it. Eleanor leaned on her mop handle, feeling the weight of the moment. This wasn't just bad management. It was cruelty dressed up as authority. And it wasn't isolated. Claire Donovan, who once championed employee wellness, now brushed off complaints with corporate jargon. I filed a report last week, Tina said bitterly. Claire told me. You have to understand, executives are under stress. Sometimes that trickles down. The words lodged in Eleanor's chest. Executives under stress. As if the people cleaning up after them didn't have their own burdens. Second jobs, childcare, medical bills. It was the same flawed logic Eleanor had fought her whole career, that those at the top deserved more understanding than those at the bottom. By the end of that shift, Eleanor made a choice. Observing wasn't enough. She needed proof. Undeniable, unshakable proof. So, the next morning, she visited a small electronics shop in the International District and bought a pen-shaped camera. She clipped it into her janitor's polo, the lens barely visible, and began recording her nights. Conversations in break rooms, casual insults in hallways, even the small, telling details, like how Marcus never addressed staff by name, only by you. The first night she used it, the pen caught Marcus berating an elderly cleaner for leaving a spray bottle on the wrong shelf. You people can't follow the simplest instructions, he said, his voice dripping contempt. The man's shoulders sagged as he apologized. Eleanor's hands tightened on her mop handle. She forced herself to stay silent. This was evidence now. She started keeping a second notebook, one for her observations, one for direct quotes and timestamps from the recordings. In neat handwriting, she noted the patterns, Marcus's deliberate provocations, Nathan Brooks's public jokes about staff incompetence, Claire's refusal to intervene. She didn't know how long it would take to gather enough, but she was committed. And then came the night that nearly broke her cover. She and Tina were cleaning the main lobby when Nathan Brooks swept in with 2 marketing assistants in tow. His suit was immaculate, his cologne sharp enough to smell from across the marble floor. Watch this, he said to them, then flicked a stack of promotional flyers into the air so they scattered across the floor. Oops, guess you got a mess. Ladies, he laughed. The assistants laughed, and they walked away without a backward glance. Tina muttered something in Spanish under her breath and knelt to gather the papers. Eleanor knelt beside her, heart pounding, not from anger, but from the realization that her pen camera had caught the entire scene. The footage was gold. It showed exactly what she needed, not just one man's cruelty, but the culture that allowed it. Still, the emotional toll was heavy. Every night. She returned to her small rented apartment and sat in silence for a few minutes before removing the wig and glasses. Looking in the mirror, she sometimes barely recognized herself. Lila Jones was treated like she was invisible. But Eleanor Carter? She had once commanded boardrooms, negotiated million-dollar contracts, built teams from scratch. Now, she was back to being the woman no one saw. By choice. Yes, but the sting was real. And yet, in the quiet moments, she thought about Sophia. Her daughter didn't know any of this was happening. Sophia was brilliant, yes, but also trusting, too trusting. Eleanor remembered when Sophia was 8, coming home in tears after a classmate had spread lies about her. Eleanor had told her then, "The world will try to take your crown. Baby, you have to know when to fight to keep it." This was one of those times. by the end of the second week. The evidence was growing. Eleanor had captured enough to prove a pattern. But something told her the worst was yet to come. And she was right. Because the very next shift. She overheard Marcus and Nathan talking in hushed voices near the break room. She couldn't catch every word. But the phrases "Sophia doesn't have the spine for this, and we'll make sure the board sees it our way" were crystal clear. Her pulse quickened. This wasn't just mistreatment of staff. This was an active threat to her daughter's leadership. Eleanor adjusted the pen camera and stepped closer, careful to stay in the shadow of the vending machine. If they were planning what she suspected, she would need every second of proof. The conversation that night started like any other idle office gossip, but Eleanor quickly realized it was something far darker. She was crouched by the vending machine, pretending to restock napkins from a janitor's cart. When Marcus's voice drifted into the hallway, "I'm telling you, Nathan, it's going to be easy. Sophia's too green, too naive. The board's already questioning her leadership. All we have to do is give them the numbers to prove she's a liability." Nathan chuckled, a low, smooth sound that had probably charmed many investors. But here, it carried venom, and by numbers. "You mean?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "We show a $10 million loss this quarter, shift some projections, bury a few invoices, delay the next product launch. Claire's already agreed to lose the right paperwork. By the time Sophia catches on, the board will be ready to vote her out." Eleanor felt the air leave her lungs. They weren't just toxic managers. They were traitors, willing to sabotage the very company they worked for and destroy her daughter's career in the process. Her first instinct was to step out, to tear off the wig and glasses and let them know exactly who they were dealing with. But she forced herself to stay still, to breathe, to let the pen camera record every word. This was no longer just about mistreatment of janitors. This was corporate espionage within her own walls. When Marcus and Nathan finally walked away, their laughter echoing down the hall, Eleanor stood frozen for a moment, her hands gripping the cart until her knuckles turned white. She had spent her life fighting to build BrightWave into something that stood for more than profit. Now, the people she had once trusted were plotting to dismantle it from the inside. That shift became a blur. She kept moving, kept mopping floors and wiping down tables, but her mind replayed the conversation over and over. Every word was a nail in the coffin of the loyalty she thought still existed at BrightWave. Later, in the service corridor, she found Tina hunched over a bucket, her shoulders shaking. "What happened?" Eleanor asked softly. Tina lifted her head, and Eleanor saw the dark stains spreading across her uniform. "Marcus," she said flatly. "He accidentally spilled soda on me in front of the developers, told me to clean it up before I made the place smell like a gas station." Eleanor's chest tightened. She saw Sophia's face in her mind. 8 years old again, standing in their kitchen after being shoved on the playground, whispering, "Why do they hate me?" That same helplessness was in Tina's voice now. Eleanor knelt beside her, helping blot the stain. "You didn't deserve that," she said firmly. Tina gave a humorless laugh. "Deserve's got nothing to do with it. Around here, the lower you are, the more they step on you." The words hit Eleanor like a hammer. This was exactly the culture she'd vowed never to allow when she started BrightWave. And yet, here it was, flourishing in the shadows while her daughter fought to steer the company forward. By the end of the night, Eleanor had made a decision. She wasn't just gathering evidence anymore. She was preparing for war. The next morning, she reached out to a contact she trusted implicitly. Eleanor Carter, Sophia's cousin and one of the sharpest data analysts at BrightWave. She didn't reveal her identity in the message, only that she was someone looking into irregularities and needed his eyes on the financial data. Jamal responded within hours, agreeing to meet in a quiet corner of a coffee shop 2 blocks from headquarters. When she arrived, still in her Lila disguise, Jamal eyed her with curiosity. "You're not who you say you are," he said quietly, sliding into the booth. "But I'm listening." Eleanor leaned forward, lowering her voice. "I have reason to believe there's a plan to fabricate losses in this quarter's reports. Can you confirm if anything looks off?" Jamal frowned, already pulling out his laptop. "Funny you say that. I noticed some discrepancies last week. A few invoices marked as paid but no payment in the ledger, and there's a delay on the Horizon Pay rollout that doesn't make sense. It's as if someone wants the revenue pushed to the next quarter." He looked up. "If what you're saying is true, it's deliberate. They agreed to exchange information carefully. No emails, no official channels. Eleanor would keep collecting video and audio. Jamal would track the data trail. That night, back in her apartment, Eleanor felt something she hadn't in weeks. Resolve sharpened into purpose. She wasn't just a witness anymore. She was building the case that would take Marcus, Nathan, and Claire down. The following nights tested her patience. Nathan cornered her in the marketing suite, sweeping papers onto the floor just to watch her bend down to collect them. "Careful, Lila," he said with mock concern. "Don't throw out the $1 million ideas with the trash." She smiled faintly, all while the pen camera blinked silently. In another incident, Claire intercepted Tina in the hallway, dismissing her request for protective gloves with a shrug. "Budget cuts," Claire said, walking away without a second glance. Eleanor caught the entire exchange, her blood boiling. This was the same woman who had once fought for ergonomic chairs for interns. Each insult, each act of dismissal, each smirk, they all became part of a growing library of evidence. But the toll was real. Eleanor began to feel the weight in her bones at the end of each shift, not from the physical work, but from the constant restraint. It was a strange kind of pain, being insulted to your face and knowing you could destroy the person in seconds, but choosing to wait for the right moment. That moment, she knew, was coming sooner than anyone expected. One night, while cleaning the small executive kitchenette, she overheard Marcus on the phone. "Once Sophia's out, the first thing we do is renegotiate the stock options. I'm not running this place for peanuts." A pause, then laughter. "No, she'll never see it coming. She's too busy playing CEO." Eleanor's hands stilled on the sponge. Every word was another nail in the case she was building. Back in her apartment, she reviewed the footage from the last 2 weeks. The soda incident, the flyer stunt, the coffee spill, the casual cruelty in Nathan's voice, Claire's apathy, and now, the conspiracy spelled out in Marcus's own words. It was all there. Still, she knew she couldn't go to Sophia yet, not without every thread tied together, because when she did, there could be no doubt, no room for Marcus to twist the narrative. The breaking point had arrived, not in a single explosive moment, but in the steady accumulation of every insult, every abuse, every betrayal. And Eleanor Carter, founder of BrightWave Technologies, was ready to remind her enemies exactly who she was by the 3rd week of her undercover mission. Eleanor Carter had stopped thinking of her notes and recordings as evidence and started thinking of them as ammunition. Every night, she'd return to her small rented apartment, remove the wig, glasses, and janitor's uniform, then sit at her desk and review the footage with the precision of a trial lawyer building her closing argument. But nothing she'd gathered so far compared to what Jamal Carter slid across the table at their next coffee shop meeting. "You were right," he said, his tone clipped, eyes scanning the shop for prying ears. "I've traced at least 5 separate transactions. Contracts marked as paid but with no deposit in the accounts. Supplier invoices routed through shell entities. And project delays that make zero operational sense. They're moving money around to create the illusion of a $10 million shortfall." Eleanor leaned in, her voice low. "And you can prove it?" Jamal nodded grimly. "Every bit of it. It's too clean to be sloppy accounting. This is coordinated." Marcus signed off on the delayed product launch. Nathan approved the reallocated marketing budget, and Claire signed the HR payroll adjustments that magically inflated overhead costs. They're all in on it. Eleanor's stomach tightened. It was exactly what she feared. Sabotage on a scale large enough to manipulate the board into thinking Sophia was running the company into the ground. She imagined the smug expressions on Marcus and Nathan's faces when they'd finally oust her daughter, step into leadership, and claim they were saving BrightWave. The thought alone was enough to make her grip the coffee cup until her knuckles whitened. "We need to connect my footage to your numbers," she said firmly. "If we can show both the financial trail and their behavior toward staff, the board won't just fire them. They'll never work in this industry again." Jamal tapped his laptop. "I've started compiling a timeline. Your video dates matched against the financial changes. For example, the day Marcus ordered Tina to re-clean the conference room 3 times, that was the same day he signed the fake maintenance invoice for $25,000. Nathan's flyer stunt? Same day he approved a $400,000 market research expense to a company that doesn't exist. Claire's budget cut to deny staff gloves? Same week she signed a payroll adjustment that conveniently added 3 non-existent employees to HR's roster. Eleanor felt a dark satisfaction bloom in her chest. It wasn't just cruelty. They were funding their coup on the backs of the very people they degraded. That night, back in her janitor's uniform, Eleanor moved through the BrightWave halls with sharper focus. Every interaction was another possible thread. She lingered near the break room long enough to hear Nathan bragging to a colleague about an upcoming executive retreat in Hawaii. One she knew wasn't on any official calendar. Later, she passed Claire's office and caught a glimpse of a manila folder labeled Q2 adjustments being slipped into her desk drawer. It took everything in her not to snatch it then and there. Instead, she made a mental note of the exact time and date. 2 days later, her patience paid off, as she was emptying trash bins in the executive wing. She overheard Marcus on a call again. "The board meeting's in 2 weeks. By then, the numbers will speak for themselves. Sophia will have no choice but to step down." A pause. Then, "Yes. I've already promised Nathan and Claire their bonuses. Loyalty pays." "My friend..." Eleanor's pulse quickened. She angled the pen camera toward the door, capturing both his voice and the timestamp on the hallway clock. She could already imagine playing this clip in the boardroom, watching his arrogance curdle into panic. When her shift ended, she met Jamal in the parking garage, handing over the latest recordings. They stood beside his car, the hum of fluorescent lights above them, and pieced together the final details. Jamal had also discovered that Marcus had been quietly courting 2 board members, inviting them to private dinners, sending them early previews of doctored quarterly reports. If those 2 side with him, Jamal warned, Sophia's out by majority vote. We need to hit them with the truth before Marcus gets to them. Eleanor knew what that meant. She would have to break cover, but not yet. First, she needed Sophia prepared, not just with facts, but with the steel to walk into a room full of people eager to see her fail and stand unshaken. That part would be harder than exposing Marcus. She'd seen it in Sophia's eyes before, brilliance tempered by self-doubt, the legacy of years spent being compared to her mother's near-mythic rise. Still, the clock was ticking. That weekend, Eleanor and Jamal spent 6 hours in her apartment, cross-referencing every clip, every document, every transfer of funds. By midnight, they had a bulletproof presentation, a minute-by-minute alignment of fraudulent activity and recorded abuse. Eleanor insisted they start with the smallest incidents, the coffee spill, the re-cleaning orders, the flyer stunt. Before moving into the conspiracy, it has to build. She explained, the board needs to see the rot from the ground up. By the time we get to the $10 million, they'll understand exactly who these people are. On Monday night, Eleanor almost lost her chance while mopping the corridor near Claire's office. She noticed Nathan walking quickly toward her, his eyes narrowing. "You always seem to be around when people are talking," he said casually. Too casually. "What's your deal?" "Lila?" She forced a light laugh. "Just doing my rounds." "Sir." But his gaze lingered a moment too long before he moved on. It was a warning. He was starting to notice her. That only strengthened her resolve. The reveal had to happen soon, before suspicion turned into action. 2 days later, Jamal texted her. "Got it. Proof that Marcus altered the Q1 report after submission. Claire covered it. Nathan distributed it." Eleanor read the message twice, the gravity sinking in. This wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. And now, she had everything she needed. That night, while scrubbing the glass doors of the lobby, she caught her own reflection in the pane. Lila Jones, janitor, invisible, but behind the disguise. Eleanor Carter stared back, unblinking, unafraid. She thought about her mother's words, the ones that had carried her through nights coding alone in that Tacoma apartment. Dignity is claimed, not given. Tomorrow, she would reveal herself to Sophia, and in 2 weeks, she would walk into the BrightWave boardroom, not as a cleaner, not even as a retired CEO, but as a woman who had fought her way up from nothing and would burn her life's work to the ground before letting vultures like Marcus Reed take it. The conspiracy was no longer hidden. It was in her hands, neatly packaged and ready for detonation, and Eleanor intended to pull the pin herself. Eleanor had rehearsed the moment in her mind 100 times, but when she finally stood outside Sophia's Seattle condo, the weight of it pressed on her chest like a stone. She wore no wig, no glasses, no janitor's uniform, just herself, for weeks. She had been Lila Jones, the invisible cleaner who moved through BrightWave's halls without notice. But tonight, she would be Eleanor Carter again, mother, founder, and the only person standing between her daughter and the wolves. She knocked once. The door opened almost instantly, and Sophia stood there, hair pulled back, laptop balanced on one arm, her sharp features drawn tight with exhaustion. "Mom?" she asked, confusion flickering in her eyes. "What are you doing here so late?" Eleanor stepped inside without answering right away. She needed to find her footing, because what she was about to say would change everything. They sat at the kitchen island, a single pendant light casting a soft glow between them. Sophia set her laptop aside, crossing her arms in that way she did when bracing for bad news. "All right, you're scaring me. What's going on?" Eleanor took a deep breath. "Sophia, I've been working at BrightWave these past 3 weeks. Not in an office, not as a consultant, as a janitor, under the name Lila Jones." Sophia blinked, the words not quite landing. "What? That's... why?" Eleanor leaned forward, her voice steady but low. "Because I've been hearing things. Whispers about a toxic culture, about staff being mistreated, and worse, about people plotting against you. I needed to see for myself, and I did." Sophia's lips parted, a mix of disbelief and hurt flashing across her face. "You went undercover in my company? Without telling me?" Eleanor nodded slowly. "If I had told you, you might have tried to stop me, and you wouldn't have believed the depth of what's happening without seeing it yourself." She reached into her bag, pulling out a slim black folder and the pen camera. "I have recordings. Marcus Reed mocking and humiliating employees. Nathan Brooks scattering papers on the floor for cleaners to pick up. Claire Donovan ignoring complaints. And I have proof they're conspiring to falsify a $10 million loss this quarter to force you out." For a moment, Sophia just stared at her. The words seemed to hang in the air, heavy and unreal. Marcus, Nathan, Claire, they've been with us for years. Claire was at my wedding. Marcus helped with Dad's memorial. Her voice cracked on the last word. You're telling me they've been planning to destroy me? Eleanor reached across the counter, taking her daughter's hand. I'm telling you they've already started, and if we don't act, they'll succeed. Sophia's hand trembled. Maybe I'm not cut out for this, she whispered. Maybe they're right. I'm not you. Mom, you built this company from the ground up. I'm still figuring out how to lead it. Eleanor's voice softened but gained an edge of steel. Do you think I didn't hear those same words about myself? That I wasn't told, again and again, that I didn't belong? The only difference between you and them is that you care. That's what makes you worthy of leading BrightWave, and I will not let them take that from you. Sophia's eyes glistened, and for a moment, she looked like the little girl Eleanor used to carry on her hip, the one who would tug on her mother's blazer before a big meeting and whisper, "You're gonna win, Mommy." But now, the roles had reversed. I don't know if I can walk into that boardroom and face them, Sophia admitted. Eleanor squeezed her hand. You can, and you will, because you won't be walking in alone. Jamal arrived 15 minutes later, laptop in tow. He'd been expecting this meeting since the day Eleanor told him she would break her cover. He laid out spreadsheets, transaction records, and email logs, walking Sophia through every fraudulent move. It's airtight, he said. The moment we present this, Marcus, Nathan, and Claire are finished. Sophia scanned the documents, her hands steadying as the reality shifted from betrayal to strategy. We'll call an emergency board meeting, she said, her voice gaining strength. We'll control the narrative. No leaks, no warning. When we walk in, it will be with the full weight of the truth. Eleanor nodded, pride swelling in her chest. This was the Sophia she knew, sharp, decisive, unwilling to let fear dictate her choices. But still, she could see the hurt lingering behind her daughter's eyes. Betrayal from strangers was one thing. Betrayal from people you trusted was a wound that didn't heal quickly. We'll make them answer for every word, every action, Eleanor said firmly. And we'll do it in front of the very people they thought they could manipulate. They spent the next 2 hours refining their plan. Eleanor would attend the meeting as Lila Jones, pushing the janitor's cart into the room just as Sophia began presenting the financial irregularities. Marcus would, as always, try to undermine her, right up until Eleanor removed her disguise and played the recordings for the entire board. The thought of his face in that moment almost made Eleanor smile. Almost. As the night wore on, Sophia began to see the humor in it too. You, dressed as a janitor, walking into the boardroom in front of people worth hundreds of millions, they'll never see it coming. Eleanor chuckled softly. That's the point. They underestimated me. They underestimated you. And in 2 weeks, they're going to regret it. Before leaving, Eleanor paused at the door, turning back to her daughter. Sophia, I'm sorry if this hurt you. I never meant to go behind your back, but I had to protect you, and I had to protect what we built. Sophia crossed the room and hugged her tightly, the kind of hug that closed the distance between years and mistakes. I'm glad you did, she whispered. Now let's finish this. As Eleanor stepped into the cool Seattle night, the city lights shimmering against the dark water, she felt something shift. The weeks of insults, of playing the invisible woman, of swallowing her pride. They had all led to this moment. The battle ahead would be public, messy, and unforgettable. But for the first time since donning the disguise of Lila Jones, Eleanor felt lighter. The truth was no longer her burden alone, and soon, it would set the entire company free. The BrightWave Technologies boardroom had always been a space of glass, chrome, and control, a stage where fortunes were made and reputations destroyed in the time it took to review a quarterly report. On the morning of the emergency meeting, the air inside felt charged, the kind of tense stillness before a thunderstorm. Board members took their seats, murmuring to each other over steaming cups of coffee. Sophia Carter sat at the head of the table, posture flawless, the picture of calm authority, though Eleanor, standing just outside the frosted glass doors in her janitor's uniform, knew her daughter's pulse was racing. Today would either cement Sophia's leadership or end it, and Eleanor was about to make sure it was the former. Inside, Sophia began smoothly, clicking to the first slide of a presentation Jamal had prepared. I called this meeting to address some troubling financial irregularities in our Q2 reports, she said, voice clear and steady. I've asked our data analyst, Jamal Carter, to join us and walk you through the numbers. Jamal stepped forward, laying out the evidence piece by piece, the delayed product launch, the false invoices, the inflated payroll. A few board members exchanged skeptical looks, while others frowned, their eyes narrowing on the figures. At the far end of the table, Marcus Reed leaned back in his chair, arms folded, wearing a smirk that Eleanor knew too well. Sophia, he interrupted, his tone laced with condescension. I'm concerned you might be misunderstanding standard operational adjustments. Running a company isn't the same as writing academic papers. Sophia didn't flinch. Marcus, I'm not misunderstanding anything. These are documented, deliberate manipulations of our financials. She gestured to the slide. And they all lead back to you, Nathan Brooks, and Claire Donovan. Nathan gave an incredulous laugh. That's absurd. If you want to accuse your leadership team of fraud, you'd better have something stronger than half-baked charts, Claire added, her voice dripping with faux concern. Sophia, you're new to this role. It's natural to make mistakes in judgment, but these accusations, and that's when Eleanor pushed open the door. The board members turned, some frowning at the intrusion, others barely glancing at the woman in a navy polo shirt pushing a janitor's cart. Marcus's eyes lit up with mockery. Oh, perfect. Maybe the cleaning lady can explain to us what fraud looks like. Laughter rippled from his end of the table. Eleanor stopped beside him, meeting his gaze without a word. Then, in one smooth motion, she reached up, pulled off the gray wig, removed the thick glasses, and straightened to her full height. A ripple of shock swept the room. Good morning, she said, her voice rich and unshakable. For those of you who don't recognize me without a power suit, I'm Eleanor Carter, founder of BrightWave Technologies. Gasps filled the air, the kind that come when the script flips in an instant. Marcus's smirk vanished, replaced by a tight, calculating expression. Nathan's chair scraped back slightly, as though distance might shield him. Claire's lips parted, but no sound came out. Eleanor didn't give them time to recover. For the past 3 weeks, I've been working here as Lila Jones, a janitor. I've mopped your floors, emptied your trash, and listened. I've listened to how my employees are treated, and I've listened to how you three have been plotting to destroy my daughter's career so you can seize power for yourselves. She reached into her cart and pulled out the small pen camera, placing it on the table. And I've recorded every word. The first clip played on the boardroom's large screen, Marcus spilling coffee on her freshly cleaned floor, mocking her age. A board member in the back shifted uncomfortably. The next clip showed Nathan scattering flyers and laughing as Tina bent to pick them up. Another showed Claire dismissing Tina's request for basic safety gear with the cold efficiency of someone who'd stopped caring years ago. The murmurs around the table grew louder, tinged with disgust. Then came the conversation Eleanor had captured near the vending machine. Marcus laying out the plan to fabricate a $10 million loss. Nathan agreeing. Claire's role in losing key paperwork. The audio was clear, the tone unmistakable. "We'll make sure the board sees it our way," Marcus's voice said from the speakers. "Sophia doesn't have the spine for this." Eleanor paused the video and let the silence stretch. When she spoke again, her voice was steady but carried the force of a gavel. "You have betrayed this company, its employees, and its values, and you did it believing no one was watching. Well, I was watching, and so is the board now." She turned to Sophia. "The floor is yours. CEO Carter." Sophia rose, her voice firm. "I move for the immediate termination of Marcus Reed, Nathan Brooks, and Claire Donovan, effective today, with cause. I also move that we open an independent audit of all operational and financial activity from the past 12 months. Her eyes swept the table. This company was built on respect, transparency, and innovation. Anyone who undermines that doesn't belong here. The vote was swift, unanimous. Marcus started to protest, but a security team, quietly summoned by Jamal before the meeting, stepped into the room. Nathan muttered under his breath, his face pale, while Claire sat frozen, eyes fixed on the table, as they were escorted out. Eleanor met Marcus's gaze one last time. "You thought you could write the ending to this story, but you forgot. I'm the one who started it." When the door closed behind them, the room seemed to exhale. A few board members began clapping, then the rest joined in. It wasn't just applause for Sophia. It was for the message Eleanor had delivered. BrightWave would not be ruled by fear or greed. Sophia looked at her mother, a small, incredulous smile breaking across her face. "You really did it." Eleanor shook her head. "We did it. And now, we rebuild." As the meeting adjourned, the two women stood together at the head of the table, the skyline of Seattle blazing in the glass behind them. They knew the work ahead would be hard, but they also knew they'd face the worst their enemies could throw at them, and won. 2 weeks after the boardroom showdown, the air inside BrightWave Technologies felt entirely different. Gone was the quiet dread that had hung over the hallways like a storm cloud. The tension that once filled the break rooms had lifted, replaced by the hum of conversations that weren't guarded whispers. Eleanor Carter could see it in the way people walked. Heads a little higher, steps a little lighter, as if the company had collectively remembered what it was like to breathe. Sophia, now standing fully in her role as CEO, wasted no time. The morning after Marcus, Nathan, and Claire were escorted out, she announced a full review of company policies, starting with a transparent financial reporting system that every department could access. No more shadow ledgers, no more hidden budgets. She set up monthly employee forums where anyone, janitors, interns, engineers, could ask questions directly to leadership without fear of retaliation, and she reinstated BrightWave's mentorship program, which had quietly been dismantled under the old guard. Eleanor chose not to retake any formal role, but she was far from a passive observer. She worked alongside Sophia as an advisor, helping her navigate the subtleties of leadership that no business degree could teach. How to read the temperature of a room without a single word being spoken. How to turn opposition into cooperation. How to anchor every decision in the values that had built BrightWave from a Tacoma apartment floor. Eleanor also insisted that the changes be more than cosmetic. "Culture isn't what you put on a poster," she told Sophia one afternoon as they reviewed proposals in her office. "It's how the lowest paid person in this building feels walking through those doors every morning." One of Sophia's first official acts was to recognize the people who had stood by the company when it mattered most. Tina Morales, the Latina janitor who had confided in Eleanor during her undercover days, was awarded a full scholarship to complete a software development program. The announcement was made in the very same executive lounge where Tina had once spoken about feeling invisible. This time, she stood at the front of the room, flanked by Eleanor and Sophia. as the entire floor applauded. "I'm going to take this chance and run with it," Tina said, her voice shaking with emotion. "Because someone finally saw me." Jamal Carter, whose meticulous tracking of the falsified financials had been instrumental in the boardroom victory, was promoted to Senior Director of Data Integrity, reporting directly to Sophia. He also received a sizable bonus, which he quietly donated to a local youth coding initiative in South Seattle. "It's the next generation we need to invest in," he told Eleanor when she congratulated him. "If we teach them integrity early, they won't need someone to go undercover to clean up their mess later." BrightWave's transformation didn't just stay within its walls, it rippled outward. News of the boardroom confrontation had leaked, not through scandal, but through the quiet, deliberate narrative Sophia allowed to be shared, that a company had faced corruption at its highest levels and chosen to root it out publicly, led by two black women who refused to back down. Industry publications ran headlines praising BrightWave's radical transparency initiative, and employee satisfaction scores soared by 40% in the first quarter after the purge. Clients who had been wary of renewing contracts not only stayed but increased their partnerships, citing trust in the company's leadership. Within 6 months, BrightWave's valuation rose from $5 billion to $6 billion, a number that would have pleased any board. But for Eleanor and Sophia, it was the culture shift that mattered most. The moment that cemented the company's rebirth came at the annual BrightWave Gala. The event had always been a display of sleek technology and investor networking. But this year, Sophia insisted it focus on the people behind the products. Engineers shared the stage with custodial staff. Interns spoke alongside senior managers. And community partners were recognized for their role in BrightWave's success. Midway through the evening, Eleanor was invited to speak. She stood at the podium, scanning the room filled with familiar and new faces, and let the silence settle before she began. "When I started BrightWave, I had one rule. No one in this building would ever feel invisible. But somewhere along the way, I stopped watching closely enough. And when you stop watching, you start losing. 3 weeks in a janitor's uniform taught me more about this company than any quarterly report ever could. It taught me that dignity isn't handed down from the top. It's built from the ground up, and it's our job to protect it. Every single day." The room erupted in a standing ovation, not because of Eleanor's title, but because of the truth in her words. She stepped down from the stage and joined Sophia at their table, the two of them sharing a quiet look that said everything: pride, relief, and the knowledge that they had not just saved a company, but reshaped it. Later that night, as the gala wound down and the city lights sparkled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Eleanor and Sophia stepped out onto the terrace. The Seattle skyline stretched before them, the Space Needle glowing against the dark sky. "You know," Sophia said softly, "I used to think I had to lead like you to succeed. But I've realized I have to lead like me, with what you taught me, but in my own way." Eleanor smiled, resting a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "That's the point. I didn't build BrightWave so you could be me. I built it so you could be better." They stood there for a long moment, listening to the faint sound of laughter drifting from inside. Eleanor thought about the long road that had led them here, the nights coding in that cramped apartment, the battles for funding, the betrayals, and the triumphs. She thought about Lila Jones, the invisible cleaner, and how she had been the most powerful person in the company without anyone knowing it. And she thought about the future, about a BrightWave where the next Eleanor Carter or Sophia Carter wouldn't have to fight quite so hard just to be seen, when they finally turned to go back inside. Eleanor glanced over her shoulder at the city one last time. The wind off the sound was cool against her face, and she felt, in her bones, the certainty that this was not just a new chapter for BrightWave, but a new dawn, not just for them, but for every person who had ever been told they didn't belong, only to prove, beyond any doubt, that they did. Thank you for watching. If Eleanor Carter's story inspired you, please like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories. See you in the next video.